"You're not allowed here," Colonel Langley snapped, his eyes fixed on the faded tattoo on the woman's wrist. A forbidden symbol, evoking military memories even classified files tried to forget. But the woman didn't flinch. In her gaze was a silent storm, a struggle between past and present, between fleeing or facing it. She made only one request: to fire a single shot. No one knew why. But she did. Because some wounds can only be healed by staring straight down the barrel. All right, my dear audience, get ready for a story that will leave you in awe. Please take a second to like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment below to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always exciting to see someone joining us from all corners of the world. The Delta 5 firing range lay deep within 29 palms, where the sand burned like a furnace and the wind carried the scent of metal. Each morning, the air here thickened with the sound of gunfire and shouted commands. This wasn't a place for spectators. It was a place to prove you could take a life from a distance, where the naked eye could barely distinguish a person from their shadow. No strangers entered Delta 5. There were no detours for the unchosen. But that morning, a woman appeared at the checkpoint gate, as if she had always belonged. No formalities, no forewarning, just presence. Silent, steadfast, not like confidence, but like something distilled through loss. Her faded denim jacket bore a thin layer of dust. Her brown hair was neatly tied at the nape, and her worn combat boots seemed to have crossed more battle lines than anyone in the area. She carried no weapon, but no one doubted she was dangerous. She presented a thin stack of papers, saying nothing beyond a clear request. "I want access to Delta 5 for 1 hour." No pleading tone, no explanation. The duty sergeant, Devlin, froze. He looked at the ID, then at the woman's face, searching for a crack in the details. The documents bore an authentic seal. The scanner didn't reject her. But something in the verification code unsettled him. A strange code, not listed in the protocols he'd been trained to handle. Before he could call a superior, familiar footsteps sounded behind. The dry crunch of boots on gravel rang like a verdict. Colonel Joshua Langley had arrived. In this base, he was the final line between order and chaos. Langley had the eyes of someone who'd seen too much. Not cruelty, but indifference. 30 years in the service had taught him not to trust what he couldn't control. And before him now was an unnamed variable. He looked at the woman, then at the papers Devlin held. He didn't need to open them. He'd seen the faint symbol on the corner of the page, a seal he thought had been erased after an internal investigation nearly a decade ago. Those seals weren't meant for survivors. "This is a military base," Langley said, his voice as dry as the desert air. "Not a wedding photo spot in the Mojave. You're in the wrong place." The woman didn't speak, didn't move a step. She stood as if her roots were sunk into the ground, as if every step of her life had led to this moment. Her gaze didn't challenge, but it didn't retreat either. In her eyes was something Langley couldn't decipher. Not defiance, not pleading, but certainty. "No," she said, almost a whisper. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Langley didn't react immediately. He'd never been refused a command so plainly. But in the silence that followed, he sensed a small fracture, not in his authority, but in the woman's story. A gap any seasoned soldier could recognize, the space of something unspoken and perhaps never speakable. The guard looked to Langley for orders. The desert wind hissed, sweeping a thin layer of sand across their boots, and in the midst, a woman without a name, rank, or visible past stood still, like an untouched piece of memory. Erin stepped through the steel gate like crossing an invisible line between memory and reality. They let her in, but not out of trust. It was a limited concession, accompanied by skeptical glances and a surveillance colder than the scopes trained on her from afar. The Delta 5 firing range stretched before her like a land not meant for humans. Every corner of sand was stained with the mark of harsh training, of life and death moments measured by breaths. Figures moved swiftly, precisely, clad in crisp camouflage, rifles an extension of their bodies, and she, just a woman in worn boots and a nameless jacket. As she passed the main training area, heads began to turn. Like a reflex, people paused when something didn't fit. Some looked confused, others didn't hide their amusement. Her presence in this environment was a visual paradox, and humans tend to mock what they don't understand. A group of young soldiers near the sandpit started whispering, snickers, comments blending with the desert wind. A phone was pulled out. Its shaky lens captured her slow steps. Someone muttered loud enough to be heard, "What? She gonna shoot with tears, sweetheart?" Laughter broke out. Not loud, but sharp, like a small, deliberate cut. Not for humor, but to assert they were above her. Erin didn't respond, didn't glance over. No forced smile, no defensive gesture. She kept walking, each step measured as if chosen beforehand, as if every grain of sand beneath her was deliberately trodden. Her silence began to unsettle, like throwing stones at a lake that refused to ripple. On the high observation platform, the only shade against the desert sun, Colonel Langley stood with arms crossed. He watched her every move with the eyes of someone who'd read thousands of intelligence reports, but had never seen one come to life like this. And then he saw it. Her left wrist, where the sleeve slipped slightly with her steps. A small, nearly faded tattoo. A broken winged bird wrapped around a red crescent moon. A chill ran down his spine, cutting through the harsh sunlight like an icy blade. That symbol didn't exist, not officially. After the 2018 investigation, all records of Phantom Echo were reclassified, encrypted, and erased from military databases. Not because the unit was insignificant, but because it was too dangerous to be known. Langley knew that symbol belonged to those who never returned, or if they did, they were no longer themselves. People who'd gone too far beyond the line morality could hold. People who'd become living weapons, but only a few retained enough humanity to beg to disappear. Langley lowered his arms, his gaze no longer cold but shifting to something else, wary and troubled. He didn't know exactly who this woman was, but that tattoo was the only proof he needed. She wasn't a joke. She was a chapter blacked out from history. Below, the laughter continued, clinking like meaningless metal. Erin kept walking, through the whispers, the scrutinizing stares, through the heat that blurred everything like a mirage. But her stride remained straight, as if she were walking through a corridor of memories no one else could see, and in it, there was no room for mockery. Dear audience, take a moment to relax or grab a glass of water, then keep listening to the story. There are still surprises ahead. Comment 1 if you find the story captivating, so we know you're still with us. The sky above was a flawless blue, vast enough to swallow all doubt. But on the ground, everything shrank in tense silence. Erin moved toward the firing range as if stepping back into the nightmare that had once shaped her life. No one called her name. No one knew who she was. But her presence cut through the air like a thin blade, light enough not to raise alarms, deep enough to make everyone uneasy. A breeze drifted by. A signal flag fluttered. Eyes followed her. She stood still, unblinking, needing no aids, no adjustments. She read the wind with an instinct like a blind person reading Braille. Nothing flashy, nothing guessed. Just a woman immersed in a moment her body had memorized long ago, before there was even war. A trainer nearby tightened his grip on his rifle, instinctively. Unease grew as he watched her tilt her head, breathing evenly, shoulders aligning as if communing with a rhythm ordinary people couldn't hear. Not a stance learned in boot camp, but instinct, etched so deeply it was bone. A whisper broke out behind, "That stance is..." No one finished. No need. They glanced at each other, then at her, as if witnessing something not in the manual. No one knew where she came from, but they all felt the same thing. This woman wasn't learning to shoot. She had shot. More than anyone here. And she was trying to recall if she could survive each pull of the trigger. On the observation platform, Langley stood motionless. A feeling he hadn't felt in years returned, one that seasoned officers avoided naming. Fear. Not of the woman, but of what she might represent. He descended, his steps heavy as if carrying the past of a generation. Standing before her, he asked her name. The answer came slowly, as if dragged from a deep place, where only stillness and the ashes of memories remained. Erin Vale. Langley felt choked. A name once recorded in the Trident Haven campaign report, then struck out. A name sent to headquarters with red ink. Missing, unconfirmed. But she was here, flesh and blood, breathing steadily, calm to the point of coldness. In his mind flashed the final note from a buried file. Executed strategic containment shots, 19 survivors, did not return. This was the return he faced, not of a person, but of an unanswered question. He wanted to ask, to force her to clarify. Why she came? Why today? Why Delta 5? But then he realized those questions didn't need to be voiced. They were etched in her every step, every breath she held, every unblinking glance at the wind-tossed flag. Langley stood there, surrounded by his own silence. And Erin needed no further words. Her presence was the answer to something this base lacked the language to express. Some don't return from war as heroes. They return as ghosts, not to haunt, but to prove they still exist. And sometimes that's the most terrifying thing of all. Without a word of request, without a pleading glance, Erin quietly bent down. The M2010 lay on the sand berm like a wild beast asleep amid a season of war. She placed her hand on it, as if touching a memory no one was allowed to mention. Every movement was fluid, so natural it made one forget this was a tool of killing. She checked each part of the rifle like a craftsman silently dusting an old instrument. No unnecessary motion, no gesture to prove herself. Her eyes didn't scan the surroundings or fix on the target. She was looking inward, to a place where each pull of the trigger not only felled a target, but left a piece of her behind. No one dared interrupt. No one moved. From the youngest soldier to the senior officer, all held their silence, as if they'd stepped into a nameless church, and this woman was the only priest still holding faith in a world of unrecorded deaths. She raised the rifle, settling it against her shoulder as if it were a severed part of her body, now reclaimed. Her breath was deep but not drawn out. No counting rhythm. Just a stillness so profound that those nearby couldn't tell if she was inhaling or exhaling. The desert wind still swept lightly across the range, carrying whispers of stone metal, and unnamed souls. Then, without warning, without ceremony, she pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, unlike any sound the young soldiers there had ever heard. Not the sound of a weapon, not the sound of technology, but something more primal, more ancient, like the soft growl of a forgotten war god waking from a long slumber. The entire range froze. All eyes followed the target 200 meters away, a distance most could only imagine on a map. The target shuddered faintly. A black dot appeared. Dead center. Not a millimeter off. No one clapped. No one spoke. Because they all knew. This wasn't a performance. It was a return. Langley tightened his helmet strap, turning away as if to hide the flicker of awe in his eyes. He no longer doubted. He knew that the name Erin Vale wasn't a clerical error or a lost shadow. She was real, and she just reminded them all that some legends vanish not because they failed, but because the world didn't know how to face those who surpassed its understanding. He tried to keep his voice steady, but it came out hoarse as he ordered, "Call command. I need all files on Erin Vale, now." Erin said nothing. She didn't celebrate, didn't nod with pride. She just sat there, head slightly bowed, her hand still resting lightly on the rifle as if trying to feel whether her soul remained in the barrel or had been carried off with the bullet. One shot, one moment, a lifetime, distilled into a perfect trajectory. But none of them understood that the most perfect thing that day wasn't the shot. It was how she didn't let it redefine her again. She had fired, not to prove, but to close. And in that moment, the entire base silently understood. Some pasts can't be erased, but they can't live in silence either. The records room lay underground, behind 3 layers of security checks and a retinal scanner that only opened with a commander's authorization. Langley descended alone, carrying a clearance code he never thought he'd need. He allowed no one to accompany him. Some answers shouldn't be heard by too many, and some stories retain their dignity only when known by few. The screen flickered to life, pulsing with each step through layers of encryption. He typed the name, Erin Vale. No file appeared immediately. Instead, a black screen gave way to a single line in plain font, as if all the past's grandeur had been choked by its simplicity. Phantom Echo, restricted access, requires special command clearance. He entered the code. The server paused briefly, then files began to appear. Disjointed headlines, as if pieced together by trembling hands. Audio logs incomplete. Many videos erased or replaced with static images. But amid the gaps was a hazy truth, chilling enough to freeze anyone who dared touch it. Erin Vale. Recruited at 19 after a flawless accuracy test. A single shot through 2 layers of bulletproof glass in 35 p.m. crosswinds. Internal assessment. Unclassifiable by standard training metrics. She was assigned to Phantom Echo, a unit absent from official rosters, tasked with missions no one else dared take, or were permitted to exist. Each appearance, a shadow. Each completion, no record, no medals, no honors. Only lingering silence. Langley scrolled through pages, each mission report like charred old leather. Operations in restricted zones, names without nationalities, targets eliminated before their faces appeared on wanted lists. But nothing spoke of emotion. No line described the shooter's gaze. Everything was presented in numbers: distance, angle, ammunition type, time. And then, the final page. A handwritten note, nearly obscured by 2 red lines, struck across it. Though old, it was still clear enough to read. Broken bird symbol, irrecoverable psychological response, removed from system. Langley froze. That line, like a sentence signed by hands that knew the brutality of silence better than anyone. But he knew. Erin wasn't removed for weakness. She didn't break. She didn't betray. She simply refused. Refused to remain part of a machine with no way back. Refused to be a weapon polished each night but never called by a human name. She stepped out of formation, not from failure, but because she held on to something too many had lost. Humanity. He recalled a note from the final mission report. After eliminating the target, Erin refused to leave her sniper perch. She kept her scope on the civilian area for 26 minutes, not firing, not speaking. When ordered to withdraw, she only whispered, "Enough." Those 2 words, just 2, had closed a file, struck a name, erased a person from the system as if she'd never existed. Langley stood there, not sitting, not touching the screen again. In his mind, Erin's image resurfaced, not the elite soldier, not the legendary shooter, but a solitary woman bending over a rifle that was once an extension of her heart, then setting it down as if placing a shattered piece of her soul on the ground. No one survives war whole, but some choose to survive by refusing to pull the trigger again. And Langley, stepping out of that room, carried not just a file, but proof that sometimes true courage lies not in shooting, but in saying, "Enough." The file was opened in a windowless room, where the only light cutting through the thick darkness came from the white glow of the screen. Langley stood silently before the decrypted files, unlocked after layers of security. Part of him didn't believe his eyes. Part of him knew exactly what he would see. The first page was faded, its coded numbers meaningless. But deeper in, fragments of memory took shape. A young woman with a sharpshooting ability that defied all metrics. Maps, satellite images, tactical diagrams, and amid them, the name Erin Vale appeared like a faint shadow, visible only when needed, then vanishing as if she'd never existed. Her record was dense with feats, yet none bore medals. Shots that saved hundreds of lives were marked as proactive response. Missions no ordinary soldier would be assigned were given to her, not with honor, but with silence. And then, at the end, a line like a verdict. Broken bird symbol, irrecoverable psychological response, removed from system. Langley paused, his eyes tracing the shaky handwriting of someone who no longer believed what they wrote. Irrecoverable psychological response? Or a conscience awakening? He wasn't sure, but he knew Erin hadn't vanished because of failure. She had refused. Refused to be a gun that needed no heart to fire. Refused to persist in a system that rewarded precision without caring for consequences. Erin wasn't defeated. She stepped away from the ranks, from deployments, from all titles. To survive not as a legend, but as a human, trying not to become the weapon she once used to protect others. Langley closed the file. The screen went dark, leaving him in a darkness, not quite grim, but heavy enough to make a man like him sigh. He met her again outside the firing range. The desert at dusk painted the sky in deep golds and fiery oranges, as if the earth itself held its breath for what had just happened. She stood there, apart from all, yet not lost. She belonged to this place, as if the sand and wind had held her form in their embrace for ages. Langley didn't mince words. Why come back? His voice wasn't cold, wasn't interrogating. Just a question from a man who'd commanded hundreds, but rarely dared ask something not in the rulebook. Erin didn't look at him. She gazed out, where the sunlight spilled across the sand in ribbons, like bandages for a wound that never fully healed. Because I needed to know, she said softly. If I could look through the scope again and not see blood. Langley didn't reply. He didn't need to. In his eyes then there was no trace of rank or command, only respect, for someone forged by violence yet found a way to hold on to herself. Not because she hit the target, but because she knew when to stop. He didn't apologize. She didn't accuse. Between them was a silence steeped in things no longer needing to be said, as if every shot had been heard, and every wound had someone to remember it. And then she walked away. Not fast, not slow, no wave, no glance back. But Langley knew she was no longer a ghost. She was proof that some legends survive, not because they never broke, but because they found a way to heal in a different form, more human, more real, and sometimes more painful. The training room was unusually quiet that morning. The board still hung straight, the tactical maps spread out as always, but no one chatted, no boots scuffed the concrete floor. Only the gentle sound of anticipation, a feeling unfamiliar to the young soldiers, silence to hear something not found in any manual. Erin entered the room, no uniform, no medals, no symbols of authority. Yet the silence that fell was as if someone had stood and lit a candle in a storm. She didn't need to state her name. She didn't need an introduction. Here, everyone already knew. She spoke little. Her voice wasn't loud, but each word landed like a stone carefully placed in the listener's heart. No shot is harmless, she said, her eyes lightly sweeping the front row where young faces looked up, curious and uneasy. Even when you save someone, she continued, you leave a part of yourself behind, a part you'll never get back. No one blinked. They didn't fully understand, but they felt the weight, like peering into a deep well, seeing nothing, but knowing something waited there, daring you to face it. She paused, as if measuring how deeply her words sank into the room, then softly said, learn to live with that. No one clapped. No one needed to. In that moment, everyone just sat still, holding their breath, as if afraid to shatter something fragile and sacred placed among them. When the talk ended, Erin didn't leave immediately. She walked outside, toward the firing range. The sun climbed high, the ground trembling faintly under the heat, as if the desert itself was anxious. An M110 awaited, pristine and perfectly tuned, resting silently on its stand like an invitation. A chance to prove herself. A final temptation. She approached, bent down, placed her hand on the rifle's body. Once again, her fingers fit perfectly into its contours, as if she'd never left it. But instead of shouldering it, she set it down, gently, without a sound. Not because I can't, she said softly, her eyes gazing toward the faint purple mountains at the horizon's end. But because I don't need to anymore. Not needing to. Not from loss of skill, but from reclaiming a part of herself that war had taken. On the observation platform, Langley stood still. He said nothing, didn't need to. In his eyes was acceptance, but more, an indescribable respect for someone who led with humanity, not rank. Erin Vale, once struck from records, erased from systems, now walked as living proof of what the military always lacked. a commander of compassion, not strength, not skill, but the courage to know when not to pull the trigger. She turned away, leaving the rifle behind like shedding a piece of memory she no longer had to carry. No one stepped forward to pick it up. No one spoke, because they understood. This was a ritual, a final shot, without a bullet, but echoing longer than any sound they'd heard in their lives. And as Aaron faded into the blinding noon desert light, a stillness enveloped the entire range. No one ordered it. No one resumed training. But each person knew they'd witnessed not just a lesson, but a reason to survive as a human. Some wars leave no visible scars, but burn quietly inside for a lifetime. And some heroes need no medals, no glory, only the courage to say, I don't need to shoot anymore. Aaron Vale's story isn't just about a perfect shot, but about choosing not to shoot, about humanity in a world that teaches strength through suppressing emotion. But no, it's emotion, it's compassion that makes us human, not weapons. If you've ever carried a war, within or without, remember, you're not alone. And sometimes, surviving means putting down the gun to keep your humanity. Thank you for listening to this story. If you saw yourself in this journey, share your feelings below. Don't forget to press like, subscribe, and send this story to someone who needs a reason to forgive themselves. Because everyone deserves to heal.